Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm your host, Nick Palavita, and today we're going to have some really great panelists and guests on a candidate for actually the U.S. Senate. First of all, let's introduce our panel. We're going to bring in from the former Associate Dean of the University of South Dakota School of Law. Let's bring in Dr. Dan Worthington. Dr. Dan Worthington, welcome to the show. Okay, good to have you here. And I have one more panelist who emailed me or called me and apparently needs a link. So I'm going to beam off. No, I think I can do it remotely and make sure he gets the link. That's Shaquille Latler from Australia. But let's introduce our special guest for today. He's actually an economics professor or former economics professor at Marshall University, a candidate for the U.S. Senate in Kentucky, taking on the immortal Rand Paul. Let's bring in Dr. Paul Hamilton. Dr. Paul Hamilton, welcome to the show. You're a brave man. Brave man, I say. You're brave because you came on the show.
I hope Rand Paul's not immortal, but he's certainly famous. Within Kentucky, he's both liked and loathed, as politicians are. But yeah, you said I did teach him more. I've actually been a lifelong academic. I mean, I'm still teaching. I'm now at Midway University in outside Lexington, Kentucky. So I'm still a full-time professor. You can see my books and that behind me. So, but yeah, glad to talk about economics and my first political run on the show today.
Okay, well, give us a little idea, a little bit more about your background, who you are, where you're from, and what you did.
Sure. Yeah. So grew up in Kentucky, which gives me maybe a little bit of advantage. Went to UK, the basketball school, ran track there actually about 30 years ago, and went to IU Bloomington for graduate school. Got my doctorate in economics. Taught at 4 or 5 schools now, and like I say, currently at Midway. Have 4 kids, pretty much grown up, and this is my first political run. So it's I call myself. I was thinking about it like a baseball candidate. I'm like 1 out of 3. Isn't that good? So I think I've got the big ideas. Some of them I might be able to share today. But that's the 1 out of 3. I don't have money to speak of, and I'm running. I don't like to say anti-Trump, but let's just say anti-current Republican currents, and try to get back to the ideas. Let's get back to policy and accomplishing things rather than complaining about Dr. Fauci and other things that go on in the media, so to speak. So,
okay. Well, tell us then a little bit about your background. You're a Republican, and what your policies are as a Republican, but not a Trump Republican.
So I'm as I say, I'm a true conservative, social conservative. I kind of half jokingly say what we used to call evangelical Christians. So that's a big tie to my Republican Party. But I'm also, I like to call myself a pragmatic economist, which that gives me a little more freedom than being pigeonholed into, a libertarian as Rand Paul is, or so in economic policies, I'm not. I'm in some ways I am dogmatic. In other ways, I'm like, there's. I think I could reach across the aisle and see some things that government could be doing more rather than less. But generally, I like to see government do less. I guess that would be my biggest thing. If I had one kind of overarching thing with economics, is just to simplify, and I think we see that probably in all programs, but I especially think of the tax code and the complexity of that, and not just that it takes work, but that it leads to tax evasion and or even legally through real estate, as our former president accomplished, amassing a lot of wealth that most people would perceive as unfairly taxed compared to the rest of us. So. But yeah, I have everything from immigration. I'm conservative, and in some ways, I think being a professor, I'm probably too nuanced for a lot of people. But I certainly have talked to several dreamers over the course of the last several months, and would be 100% behind bringing them all in as Americans. I know then at some point we can't take in everyone here. I know there's some logistical challenges. I have some other ideas that are pretty wonky. The value-added tax, I think, is something that we should start bringing online, and as part of that, have it based on the blockchain. So, like I say, most people, when you start talking about blockchain, they think of Bitcoin. They're like, "What were you saying? A digital currency?" I'm like, "No, it's just a way of tracking the product from inception to the customer." So I think there's some exciting things. I'm a big technology proponent, be it in medicine, be it in vaccinations, up to electronic medical records. She said we may talk about Medicare and what have you. So yeah, that's some of the things I've been talking about and thinking about.
Okay. What is the plan though right now in Washington, D.C.? We're seeing Medicare going broke in 2026, which is 4 years from now, I guess. And we don't see the media discussing it. It's like they're not interested. What is the plan in Washington, D.C., or what is your plan? What is Rand Paul's plan, or does he even have a plan for Medicare going broke in 2026? Your opponent.
Yeah, I think, I could kind of extrapolate from the libertarian view that probably government should get out of healthcare and let people, negotiate prices with and take out the insurance middleman, so to speak. But like I don't think there's any, and I think I've heard this before on your show and many other. We're going to need a crisis until a crisis hits, or we're dealing with the current inflation crisis and Ukrainian crisis. Something 4 years from now is, might as well be 40 or 400 years from now. I don't think there's any. I haven't seen anybody from Rand Paul to Mitch McConnell to the Democrats really talking about, like you say, if anything, adding more benefits, not how do we address the solvency issues. And I think part of that is because it's just, it's a grind. It's not like I say, well, in the future, you have two bad hips, we'll fix one. All right, we solve the payment shortage problem. And I say that half jokingly, but seriously, it's going to come to a point where there has to be some rationing, or our government debt overall is just, I think, going to create. We've got away with it so far. I mean, that's in some ways that's shocking to me. I'm really looking forward to meeting David Walker. I've been a fan of his. I was trying to remember how I connected with him, but for a long time, he's been a voice in the wilderness of like this. As I say on my campaign, part of my stump speech, what cannot go on will not go on. At some point, things are going to come to an end or a crisis, and we won't be able to, whatever, we can raise the budget limit, but we can't raise the money, or interest rates going up. I mean, there are so many challenges. In some ways, I'm coming into politics at the worst time. The table has been whatever the opposite of not set is. The table's been totally disheveled, and now I've got to come in, and it's again, I'm coming in is maybe metaphorical, but as a country, our leaders, our decision makers, and our citizens are really going to be facing tough choices. And I think we'll look back and we'll be like, could have we, have acted sooner? And I think the answer, yeah, we should have, could have, but didn't. So I think that's going to be the sad reality that we see in the next 5 to 10 years, as maybe sooner, with rising interest rates and inflation. Inflation, I think, is going to be, again, we can talk about it more, not a transitory issue as many of us hoped or stated early on. I think we've tripped some major economics here that we're going to see it for several years going forward, is my prediction. So,
okay. Well, I ask something that venture capitalists I'll ask all the time. What is your unique selling proposition versus a guy who's like an institution, Rand Paul? No words.
Right. Yeah.
What is your USP?
Sure. So yeah, my kind of 30-second elevator speech. Well, I tell people, I mean, I like Rand Paul. If you just looked at how he's voted, I mean, he does sometimes break. He's the one or two Republican senators that break from the group. But purely on voting, I would pull the same levers 90% of the time, probably. I think what really my distinction would be is rather than complaining or getting into verbal disputes with Dr. Fauci, maybe that's, to me, that's very fringe. And that's, the critique of Rand Paul is he's fringe, not just libertarian, but he gets off on these little side stories. And back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, what about the $300,000 per family debt that we have? What about Social Security and Medicare essentially crashing in the next 5, 10, 15 years at most? And so I think Rand Paul is guilty. And I think broadly speaking, our politicians have not been able to propose, be them tough solutions or clever solutions that start to deal with these big issues. We'd rather talk about, don't say gay or Fauci's $475,000 salaries if that was, totally ridiculous to pay a national medical leader $500,000. So I think that would be my biggest thing is let's get down on taxes and let's do something. And it's going to be what Republicans don't want to say, probably raising taxes. And to Democrats, all this free stuff, and it sounds nice, forgiving student loans, but it just, I mean, there's so many logistical problems, never mind financial problems with such things. So I would say, yeah, I did much more in 30 seconds, but I think we have to make these really tough choices that politicians don't, people don't, just as human nature.
Yeah, but is that stuff that can get you elected? I mean, the thing is, it sounds to me, if you're telling people you have to spend less, save more. Yeah. Okay. In other words, and you're going to have to pay the piper in order to pay more in taxes to accomplish these goals. That isn't what people want to hear to get votes. They want to hear.
You're right. You're right.
In other words,
my political staff, as I'll call them, tell me. Well, I think some of it is. I mean, we always like to hear lower taxes, right? I mean, whoever, but it's the reality. It's just like we like to hear more chocolate cake, right?
Right.
Or more ice cream. But there's a day. I think my big thing, and something I'm kind of working on academically or intellectually as well, is kind of this day of reckoning. What is it going to look like in the next year, even or 2 years, if we continue to have 7, 8%, 10% inflation? What if we have a falling out with China where they literally do not buy any more of our debt? Which actually is one of my proposals, is that that our national debt be held only by Americans, and take some time to let the outstanding debt expire or buy it back. But so I think that's, again, it's very much like David Walker and other people who have tried to be this voice in the wilderness, and it's not a hey, I'm going to create tech jobs out of nothing here in Eastern Kentucky kind of message, or coal jobs, as our former president promised and didn't deliver, although he's still held on a very high pedestal pretty much throughout the state, and especially in our rural counties, that he didn't deliver prosperity to. So that may, some of this run is not maybe about winning this time around. And I don't want to call it the told you so method, but 2 years from now, when things get, hopefully not, but maybe much tighter or even terrible for our country, be it a recession or another great recession or worse. I think that's when people are going to start maybe listening to voices that were not the promise everything kind of thing, or we're only going to tax, billionaires. Now if Dan's only worth $3 million, only makes $500,000 a year. No, he's middle class. The middle class has been stretched out. I consider myself middle class. People that had to make choices between club soccer or not second or third home or not. So it's a tough message. I mean, part of my message too is even on that kind of the social conservative message, and it has resonated, I think, with the groups I've spoken to, is Roe versus Wade, likely that will be overturned this year or in the near future, and for Christians and other social conservatives, that's the hierarchy of or the pinnacle of what we were put on earth to do is to look out for the least of these. But part of my message is, as conservatives, as men in the church, I like to especially address them. What can we do to make sure that, assuming there's more births or more crisis pregnancies that are brought to birth, how are we going to address those women and babies and children in need? And again, it's not a government solution. It could be in part, but as private citizens, how can we step in there and it's going to take more than a meeting or a few dollars. It's going to take a major movement, I guess we could call it, among private citizens, churches, and other groups that are stepping in to meet the crisis pregnancy situation, as well as other things with homelessness and addiction and what have you. So that's a message that I carry. Again, I think it's missing. There's so many. I'll just focus on my own kind of group, conservative Christian men that are kind of sitting by idly in terms of their, not just their civic activity, but their social interactions. And for many of them, I think they'd like to get in the game, so to speak, and accomplish some big things. So I think that's a message that I bring. And it's something the nice thing I say about being a Republican is, if you lose an election, you're in the private sector and you really think that's where the action is happening at. That's where you can really make differences. If you're a Democrat and you lose, like, how are we going to accomplish anything if we don't pass new laws or new legislation?
Everything's all spending programs, but also we've found that there's a big problem with financial education in the United States. And here's a couple stats that are very damaging. I think 50% of Americans don't have $500 in case of an emergency. Now, that's got to be a real problem. That if you have 100 people in the room that you're talking to, half of them, if you said there's an emergency, you're going to die if you can't come up with $500, they don't have it. But what is even worse is 70% don't even have $1,000, Dr. Hamilton. I mean, in other words, if there was a financial emergency, they can come up with $1,000. But then you go to this stat: 5% of our population own 66% of all assets in the United States. So and this is an area that, again, media doesn't like to discuss. It's here's a book on it: The Price of Inequality by Joseph
I have read that.
You read that one?
Yes.
I was going like, wait a minute. The people that are in the United States, and especially probably in your state in Kentucky, they don't realize how poor they are. In other words, relative to a lot of people in this country, and how important it is, in my opinion, to actually have assets as opposed to not have assets. And part of it is this: DeSantis actually signed a financial literacy course you're required in high school, and I have to give them a lot of credit. I didn't give much credit until he did that. Now I give them lots of credit. But does Kentucky, do people learn about financial education in high school and elementary school, or is it ignored and we're talking about critical race theory, which isn't going to get you a job? What are your thoughts on that?
There is actually, I have 3 daughters and a son. My youngest daughter's finishing high school this year, and she took a financial math class, I guess they called it, but it was actually sponsored by Dave Ramsey, of course, the financial. Don't put anything on debt, just which I think it may be a little overstepped, but he saved a lot of people's lives, literally, I'd say. So I think there's some of that coming about. for me, and if someone can answer this riddle online, I will. I'll be greatly indebted to them. But part of the riddle to me is back to, yes, people are financially strapped, but nevertheless we have the Great Resignation. We have millions of people, able-bodied, with, at least they can get, not all of them. I know sometimes there's mental illness and other things going on, but $15 an hour is pretty good money. And so if you don't have $400 to pay for the rent or the electric bill, or $1,000 to pay for your kid's soccer, whatever it is, probably something a little more critical than that. Shouldn't you be out if you're my age, 53, and both husband and wife, say? So I haven't been able to, I'm trying to talk to people and I think it's more people a little bit older, and I guess the financial, they can make it. I mean, at some point you get hungry, right? I mean, that's one solution to people not wanting to work, is you get hungry, literally or figuratively, and you go out and you get the job, or take the job. So for me, that's been a bit of a riddle, but again, I'm compassionate. I realize not everyone grew up in a home. My dad was a professor. We had books in our home, and so a lot of people in Kentucky are, it's not dirt floors, but it's chaotic family lives. There's there's people that weren't given not the literal silver spoon that I had. I don't know, maybe yourself and Dan kind of had. Not that we were given everything, but we were given many opportunities that other people. I went to UK, big public school, but never thought about would I get in or not. And for some people, that's a question. Could I even get into college? But yeah, I think with the stats there are just generally with poverty. I think that, one big thing here I would push against, it's a state thing really, is the lottery. And so again, we have these classic stories of the guy in front of me in the gas station, buys $100 lottery tickets. So my daughters can get $10,000 over the course of their 4 years in college to pay for college. So you talk about these widening gaps. I always found the lottery especially is kind of this strange one of, let's take all of our money, a lot of it disproportionately from poor people, and give it to one lucky son of a gun, $400 million. I mean, it's the most extreme kind of tax in a way. But again, there's cookies for each of us. Like I say, here we have what's called the Keys money. It's $2,500 a year if you have good grades in high school. So it's like, all right, if people want to play, now we're looking to expand it to betting on sports. And I mean, that kind of tempts me a little bit, at least a little bit of skill to it. But ultimately, I think many of these programs, they sound good, and they generate billions of dollars for our state, but hidden costs. I think almost every study, unless it's commissioned by the gambling commissioner or whatever, the people making money from it, it's about 5 to 1 cost. That these people. That's why we find, and that's not going to solve all of our problems, but that's why we're finding so many Kentuckians and other people around the country that have $400 or don't have $400 to their name, but add up, an interesting follow-up on the survey. How much did you spend on lottery tickets? And we could go through other vices as well. So, and again, that's not an easy message to preach or speak or get elected on. But I think it's the truth. I think that we've fallen for many of these schemes. The lottery is not one. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to bring in now the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States of America. David, welcome to your show, of course. Good to have you here. We're talking to Paul Hamilton, who is very brave, a brave man indeed. First of all, he's brave because he attended the show. And then number two, he's taking on Rand Paul. And he's, trying to bring sense into the United States of America, which tends to put everything on credit cards. In other words, I don't know how you get elected saying, look, we want to be fiscally responsible when everyone wants to hear tax less and spend more. So I don't know what your thoughts are, but it seems to me the politicians get elected by saying, I'm going to lower your taxes. And by the way, we're going to spend a lot more money on all these things for you. What are your thoughts, David?
Well, as I found, Nick, in my unprecedented 27 state, 10,000 mile national fiscal responsibility bus tour in 2012, the American people are a lot smarter than the politicians realize. They know you can't spend more money than you make, charge it to the credit card to an unlimited extent without having a day of reckoning. The problem is that we don't have any leadership from Washington. There's only one person that's elected by all the people from a substantive standpoint, and that's the president. And the president is the chief executive officer, commander in chief of the military. That person has the bully pulpit, which nobody else has. You can't run a country by committee. The Congress is a committee. There's nobody really in charge of the committee. You have people that are in charge of factions, also known as political parties, but they're not really in charge of the body as a whole. And we don't have much leadership with regard to this issue right now, clearly not from the White House, although they say they're leading on it, and not from Congress. We have a bipartisan problem. The Republicans prefer to cut taxes, even though they don't pay for themselves. And yes, you want to keep tax burdens as low as possible. The Democrats want to grow government and increase dependency on government without having to pay for it, which is obviously not the case. Doesn't work. Compromise is typically you give me mine, I'll give you yours, and the bottom line hemorrhages. All right. So I believe that the only way we're going to solve this, and this is an effort that I'm very much involved with, and you're going to see some news on this within the next month, is to have a constitutional amendment that doesn't focus on balancing the budget, but focuses on limiting how much debt as a percentage of the economy we can take on, with automatic targets, triggers, and enforcement mechanisms that if Congress doesn't do its job, things happen. Because the statutory restrictions have not worked. By going debt to GDP, we can employ pro-growth policies so that if we grow the denominator faster than the numerator, even if the numerator is going up, we're making progress. So a credit card limit combined with a lower target over the next 10 years or so that we want to try to hit, so we've got more running room and we can end up having a pro-growth, pro-opportunity, type of environment going forward, because that's not where we are today.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts, Dr. Hamilton?
Well, let me first say it's an honor to meet you. I'll call you Dr. Walker. I think you said you had an honorary doctorate. So
you can call me Dave. Well, since it's honorary, I kid saying I'm Dr. Dave.
Okay, Dr. Dave, good enough. I was trying to when Nick dinged me about the show, and I said, David, what? That was I don't know if it, and I obviously knew you were in office, yeah. But I can remember 15 or 20 years ago. I don't know if it was something I read of yours, but
60 Minutes in 2007, 2008. That could have been it.
It could have been right. My attention. Right. And I'm not a big this is my first political campaign. I probably can't name you 5 senators beyond, the famous ones. But I remember Dave Walker was this voice in the wilderness. So in a little ways, what I'm about is continuing that. As we kind of know, prophets, though, they speak the truth and they're right ultimately, but no one listens to them. So that kind of hurts my electability. But at the same time, I can't change my message to say, as I was saying earlier in the show, things that can't go on will not go on. And I'm hoping that we don't have to come to a crisis. Kind of to your point, though, I do think that we always, it's almost like every age sees themselves as, these are today's growing up today, or being middle-aged or old today is tougher than it was, ever before. I think Congress and other people will always, whether it's the pandemic, where we had to spend upwards of $3 trillion of deficits. Part of my gripe against former President Trump is he had $1 trillion deficit before the pandemic that Republicans haven't taken on spending. As you say, we love cutting taxes. So yeah, a big part of my message, and it's a tricky thing. It's amazing. I mean, let's enjoy the ride. I mean, that's what a lot of people say. It's just like, simmer down, Hamilton. Just enjoy housing. I told my students in my class this morning, my house, which is a nice home, but not a mansion by any stretch. I just probably gained $50,000 a year in wealth, not much less than my academic salary. So a lot of people are like, well, there's enough good things. I think, again, if COVID had been striking children, we would be having a lot different conversations today. If inflation persists for another couple of years, I think, what mortgages, banks cannot continue to lend out. I know they're 15 or 30 years, but you start looking at close to double-digit inflation. I think there are going to be some proverbial wheels coming off the economy, even in the next year or two, that should catch our attention. And I do think it's an opportunity. So that's part of what I'm. Yeah. I know Rand Paul's not alone, but I don't. And probably yes, it really does need to come from the presidency, or the leaders of the Republican Party, Mitch McConnell in my own state. So maybe when we win back the Senate, of course, I think it's going to be more of take down Obamacare and maybe cut even more taxes. I don't see military cuts or major changing in the healthcare sector. So, whether I get to Congress or not, but I'm hopeful.
Well, I think you have to be true to your beliefs, right? And people can see through you if you're not true to your beliefs.
Sure.
And unfortunately, in the United States, we're a very myopic society. Most politicians are looking to the next election. Most teenagers are looking at the next weekend, right? And so the fact is, we don't have enough people. We have too many people that are living for today, and not enough people that are trying to help create a better tomorrow, which is the exact opposite of what our nation was founded on. But you have to look at what the voter concerns are. I mean, the primary voter concerns right now are the economy, inflation, poor leadership, COVID, immigration, education, and public safety. Based on polling, those are the top concerns of the American people right now. So there's no ifs, ands, or buts. You have to address what people are concerned about now. At the same point in time, you have to help educate them on what they should be concerned about that may not be to now, but could make a big difference between whether or not our future is better than our past. I've always said, wake up call to action, way forward. You need to do all three of those things. My personal view is that based upon current conditions, voter polling, that the Republicans will take the House. We can debate what the margin will be, but they will take the House in November. The Senate is more of a toss-up. It could go either way because there are so many open seats. You have a number of people that are retiring, and the Republicans have a lot more seats up this time than the Democrats do. And you can't gerrymander a state, right? You can gerrymander a congressional district, but you can't gerrymander a state.
Don't challenge us. We'll be binding the Dakotas or something to get another seat. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, the ones I really feel bad for, I know you're running for the Senate, but the ones I really feel bad for are from the states that only have one member of Congress. And so they have to run every 2 years in a statewide office rather than running every 6 years for a statewide office. Those are the ones I feel bad for. But look, I mean, the bottom line is that, as I said in my last book, America in 2040 is still a superpower ? We are a superpower. We're a great country, but we're at risk. We've got a lot of yellow and red lights flashing that we need to come to grips with. And, and if we do come to grips with them, the answer to the question will be yes. And if we don't come to grips with them, the answer to the question may be no.
Well, doesn't that also, David, show the problem that we're having internationally? Because I know this show, we broadcast about 122 countries right now. And when we get our Chinese people on board, they criticize how bad America is doing relative to China. Their GDP is growing faster. They have high-speed trains. We have locomotives that are pretty poor. Their education system keeps moving up in the PISA scores. We keep moving down. In other words, our science, technology, engineering, math scores are all, we're not even in the top 25 anymore internationally. So they are really keen on beating the United States. Everywhere I go on, especially the website, Understanding China, okay, it's actually a Facebook group with about 125,000 people. Their whole goal and mission is to beat the United States economically. We seem to have no goals. I mean, economically, and economically, everybody's out partying, I guess, tonight, watching the UNC play Kansas.
Well, yeah, as I said in the book, there's four things it takes to be a superpower in today's times: global economic power, global diplomatic power, global military capability, and global cultural influence. The United States meets those today. All right. But the United States has no plan. We have no plan that's future focused, results oriented, that's geared along those four lines. China's got a plan. They've got a long-term plan. They're executing on that plan. One aspect of that plan is the Belt and Road Initiative, which has economic, diplomatic, military, and cultural implications, if you will. Yes, China, we're number one in the world in global in nominal GDP, but they're ahead of us in purchasing power parity GDP. We have a lot higher median household income than they do, so they've got a lot bigger gaps. They've got better educational performance with regard to K to 12. We still have the best universities in the world. All right. And so, as we all know, you have to know three things when you're trying to assess your performance, whether you're a country, whether you're a state, whether you're a company, whether you're an individual. How are you doing based on plan? And we have no plan. Number two, how are you doing? How are you trending? Are you getting better or worse? And you talked about some examples of where we're not doing too well. And number three, how are you doing compared to your competitor or comparator group? If you don't know all three of those things, you don't know how you're doing.
So what are your thoughts, Dr. Hamilton, about having a plan? Does Rand Paul have a plan other than attacking Dr. Fauci?
Well, I guess you get government out of the way and let private enterprise work. I think that's, as an economist, I think that's, at least philosophically and a conservative, I think that's probably has some merit to it. But specifics, short on specifics, I think is Rand Paul. Let me just say, I mean, China, and I have to be careful because I'm not just talking among friends here, as you say, but my metaphor is that I don't think we can admire cheaters. I don't. We could say, well, yes, they have all this whatever forced labor and government control, and we can't we can't shut down an economy without Rand Paul going off on our lead medical guy. Or nor do we want, and I know these are complex issues, but ultimately, I think myself, and I'm sure Dave Walker and the rest of the people on this panel would agree, is we believe in the institutions of America. For some of us, that's it's a little broader with our Christian faith. For others, or in addition, of course, it's free enterprise, it's opportunity. It is the resources that we've been granted that is the envy of every other country. So we've been given some latitude to make some mistakes with, political tough decisions that we've been hesitant or negligent to make. But I guess my campaign thing was I still believe in America. It's messy. We're gonna have super rich. We're gonna have poor people that stumble. We're gonna have challenges going forward. But we believe in democracy. I think we do. Sometimes I go, we do, right? not just on this panel, but among whatever, this whole January 6th thing and other things that are going on. I believe in conservatism, but then I have little old church lady that have "Let's Go Brandon," bumper stickers on their cars. And I'm like, did you know the story behind that? I mean, it's a little bit funny, but for that to go on as a kind of a political slogan, that's bothersome when we're talking about real issues. Um, so
That's a real issue,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, go ahead.
Isn't that a real issue?
Referring to like, let's go, Brandon.
Referring to the lack of leadership by the president of the United States. Isn't that a real issue?
Are you talking about Biden now or Trump?
Yeah, right. About Biden, no. Trump provided leadership to the United States.
Well, there's ways of saying
you
that.
Running on a platform bashing Trump will not get you anywhere. Rand Paul has had the courage to stand up to Fauci and the corruption of the medical authority in the United States and this whole China virus situation. There are a lot of nuances that are behind that. Rand Paul's a medical doctor. You're not. You're an economist.
Sure.
And so he's asking the hard questions about Fauci and the funding in the North Carolina lab and the moving of the virus over to Wuhan and the millions of dollars that Obama put into the Wuhan lab and the release of the virus. This has created this international catastrophic situation. And Fauci's in the middle of that. And you're bashing Rand Paul for calling him on it. I find that most not only disingenuous, but also somewhat cowardly, because Rand Paul stood up to the man, and he doesn't have the best record of integrity when it comes to medical ethics, and he's the guy in charge, but he's a problem, and he needs to go.
Yeah, Paul, what I hear you saying is when you're talking about "Let's Go, Brandon," that you're talking about sloganeering. There's a lot of sloganeering going on, a lot of personal attacks. My personal view is Fauci should have been fired a long time ago because of incompetence and because of conflicts of interest or whatever. But let's get back to something that's, I think, really the most important thing going on right now. I think the biggest battle we have going on in this country right now is a battle over what principles and values are we going to be committed to. Are we going to be committed to the founding principles and values of limited but effective government, individual liberty and opportunity, personal responsibility and accountability, rule of law and equal justice under the law, fiscal responsibility and intergenerational equity, and stewardship, which means not just delivering positive results today, but leaving things better off and better positioned in the future? Are we going to be committed to those values? Are we going to be committed to the socialist state principles of grow government, increase dependency on government, take control of healthcare, take control of education, open borders? These are big issues, and that's what's going on right now. It's to me, it's less about Democrat and Republican, although that's a very big issue. It's more about what are the principles and values that we're gonna focus on. My personal concern is that the first ones, the founding principles and values, got us to where we are. And I look around to the socialist state principles and the people that are coming here from socialist states, and they say, and I know a lot of them that have come here from socialist states that are now citizens of America that are saying, I left that. I don't want that here. I know what happens. And we need really more visibility on that.
Yeah, just quickly, I like Rand Paul, and I'm not a huge Fauci fan, but he has been our lead medical person for decades, and I think it's easy, hindsight. Yes, I think vaccination availability. It was a complex story. Many of us, from our president at the time to you name it, and many times our medical professionals have been wrong. They thought there'd be a flu epidemic, and it was 2%. It was terrible. Just disappeared for a couple of winters. So, and Rand Paul's an eye doctor, so he's not. I know that's still he's in the medical field, but on the data, I think I would hold my own, and So I'm not necessarily saying, Fauci is absolutely right, but at the same time, I think we owe it to all our leaders that they're making very complex decisions with moving parts that, I mean, Rand Paul, I would say this kind of, you know, if Rand Paul or whoever, if we would have just kept our society open as, what was it, Finland or Sweden, one of those Norwegian countries, my parents, who are in the early 80s, very likely one of them would have passed away. My dad did get COVID, but after having the shot, and for a very mild case in the end. So these are complex issues, be it medical leadership, be it how Congress should engage with the medical community or the Fed. I mean, that's a whole nother issue, which is coming more to the forefront now with inflation, and the Fed's independency is probably once again going to be challenged. So,
yeah, I think my problem with Fauci, and I want to get off of Fauci, is he's had numerous ethical breaches. I just, you know, anybody, if you look at his relationships, his patents and things of that nature, if you look at the fact the guy's writing a book and getting royalties on it while he's in public office, I just have an ethical problem with him. And nobody gets things right all the time. We understand that. Yeah. You know, and so I think we just have to recognize that reality. But, you know, one of the issues that was talked about a few minutes ago is poor leadership. That's number 3. That's the number 3 concern among America's voters: poor leadership, both domestic and internationally. And that's a real issue that we're going to have to come to grips with.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
I was going to say that you, David, you had something very interesting. The economy, inflation, leadership being the 3 big issues. Mm-hmm. How can we improve the economy if we import, which I you know, sometimes you find out things afterwards. We imported $100 million a day of oil from Russia. How do we improve the economy if we build all of our cell phones overseas? How do we improve the economy if our pills that I take are being manufactured in India? Okay, and I know we broadcast internationally, so I'm not trying to put down all those countries that we just did, but how can we improve our economy if everything is being built outside the United States and imported into the United States? I don't see how our economy is going to grow except at this paltry 3% per year, or maybe even less, if we don't start manufacturing and building things here.
Amen.
Well, first we ought to be energy independent. We have the ability to be energy independent. We were energy independent. We are now producing 1.5 million barrels of oil less today than we were at the end of 2019. You know, that would help with regard to economic growth. It would help with regard to economic security. It would help with regard to national security, if you will. You know, we need to better balance, you know, economic considerations with environmental considerations. Yes, climate change is real. Man does contribute to that. We need to, you know, move towards alternative sources, but we've got to do it over a lot longer period of time than is being talked about right now. Okay. You know, we have over outsourced. There's no question about it. We've over outsourced to China and to others, in part because of cheap labor, you know, more lax environmental and labor laws, if you will. And we got to reconsider that. And it's not just a matter of where you manufacture. It's a matter, where do you get your raw materials? Where do you get your resources? Okay. We're unduly reliant upon China for rare earth materials. We're unduly reliant on other countries for materials that make up our prescription drugs. We're unduly reliant upon others for semiconductors. Okay, and by the way, what's the number one producer? Who's the number one producer of semiconductors? Taiwan. Yeah. And watch out for Taiwan. Okay, I mean, as I said in my latest book, I think China will take Taiwan. And I think they'll take it sooner than otherwise I would have thought, because of Afghanistan and because of Ukraine. And what people need to understand is, while Ukraine is clearly a sovereign nation recognized by the United Nations and most other countries around the world, Taiwan is not recognized as a sovereign nation. And a treaty doesn't exist with Taiwan, nor did one exist with Ukraine. And so we'll have to see what ends up happening. So again, it comes back to, you have a plan. Do we have a plan? okay, that deals with some of these issues? No.
No.
We have no plan, okay? Therefore, any road will get you there, or you're going nowhere fast.
A bumpy road.
Right. Well, that's what I see. There is no plan.
There's no
Like,
plan.
and this is the problem I also have with the Social Security Medicare. Media doesn't discuss it. Congress doesn't discuss it. It's going broke in 3 years. And the only thing that comes out of Congress is, well, we're not really broke. We just can't pay our bills. And
Well, let's
David,
talk about that
doesn't
for a
cut it,
second.
man.
Because
That
as you
doesn't
know, I
cut it.
used to be a trustee of Social Security and Medicare
Yeah, right.
from 1990 to 1995. And I, in my co-public trustee, blew the whistle that they didn't solve the problem in 1983 and that these programs were unsustainable in their present form. And, you know, and I've been on the fiscal responsibility trail for 30 years, okay? The last time that we solved Social Security was because within weeks, the trust fund, quote unquote, was going to go to zero.
Right.
And therefore, tens of millions of Americans were going to get their Social Security payments cut immediately. Okay. Well, and so Congress didn't do anything until it was on the edge of the cliff. Now, that cliff, as you pointed out, for Medicare Part A is 2026. I think it's going to get earlier when the new comes sooner when the new report comes out. And it's 2031 for combined, or 2033 for combined Social Security. I think it's going to move closer. You know, when you have a large, known, and growing problem, it's prudent to solve it sooner rather than later.
Right.
And that's part of the problem with society, okay? You know, Congress doesn't want to make tough choices unless there's a crisis that gives them cover to do it, all right? But the kind of crisis we would get if we don't put our finances in order is one we should never want to see, all right? And the longer that you wait to make these tough choices, the higher taxes are going to go, the more benefits are going to be affected, the longer people are going to have to work. It's just math. I mean, isn't that complicated? It's just math.
Yeah. Well, it sounds to me, talking to Paul, that the magic hand of Adam Smith will come in and take care of everything, because it sounds to me that Rand Paul says, well, I don't believe in any government or diminished government. But wait a minute. That's not what we're electing people for. We're electing them to solve this problem. In other words, the Medicare and Social Security issues, not to brush it off and saying some magic hand is going to come in and just solve the problem. There ain't no magic hand that's going to come and solve the problem. You need to solve the problem. And I don't see anything coming from Congress to solve Medicare, Social Security, no long-term plan, no short-term plan, no plan at all. In other words, it's like, hey, you know, we'll wait until it becomes a crisis in 2026. Then we're going to address it. You know, it's actuarially totally unsound.
Yeah. Well, I'd add, and we talked about this just briefly before I'm talking to Nick before the show. I think inflation will actually be kind of a non-traditional invisible hand that's going to start getting people's attention. I mean, obviously, it's got people's attention at the gas station and what have you. But I've heard some economists. I haven't seen an academic study yet, but you know, if you're a debtor, especially at low interest rates and inflation goes up, you're actually you played your cards right. Once again, and maybe America, somehow we've dumped off all this money to China and Russia and Japan. You know, some are a little more friendly, and yeah, inflation when you're in debt is actually a little bit of a solve to the problem. And again, I can't run on that platform as let's just inflate, but it's not the traditional invisible hand, but markets adjust and people ultimately, I think, get the message in the hard way, though, as Dave Walker was saying, rather than maybe in a more coordinated way if we could act a little bit sooner. So.
And Paul, as you were saying before, I mean, the Federal Reserve, in my opinion, has been aiding and abetting fiscal irresponsibility far too long. I mean, you know, they've kept interest rates artificially low. They've purchased trillions of dollars of U.S. debt in order to hold down interest. And you're right that when inflation goes up, it makes it easier to be able to pay off your debt. But let me tell you what it doesn't make it easier to do: to pay your interest payments. You know, if we had market rate interest right now, we'd be paying a lot more for interest on that debt. Okay. And eventually we're going to be paying higher interest rates. And in fact, the Congressional Budget Office and others have projected that in the not too distant future, we're going to be paying more for interest then we're paying for national defense. And what do we get for interest? As we say in the South, shinola, nothing. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are definitely some serious problems. And what about leadership? In other words, Paul, is there anything a senator can do in terms of being a leader today? Because, like David said, it's like leadership by committee. But like I said, I don't see much leadership coming out of Congress right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of my big things, and you guys probably know more about it than I do, is we pass these huge packages that are thousands of pages long, and they're about whatever economic relief, and then they end up getting, Senator Byrd's probably still getting bridges named after him in West Virginia, what have you. So part of it, I think, is we have to have more focused legislation that really is. People can actually read it. It can be debated on all floors. It can be debated outside. And people can kind of understand it rather than, these $1 trillion packages that bundle so many things together and the pork and earmarks and what have you. So I think that's one thing that would kind of make sense. I know senators can't maybe unilaterally change that, but kind of what Dave Walker, even if we don't have all the problems, let's energy independence is something that especially Republicans kind of like. I think everyone would, in some ways, would like. And the trade-off is a bit of some environmental questions, which are, again, at times equally or more important. But right now, when we're talking about millions of lives in Ukraine and really in Europe, and then ultimately maybe here, the environmental agenda gets moved to the back burner, and I know that doesn't resonate with everybody. So I think that's one thing that we could do is having more focused decisions. And I do think there needs to be some discussion of, it's not going to, if we don't act, especially if we can say something in the next year or two, if we don't act now, this is going to happen in the housing market. How many people are going to be priced out of the market? This is going to what's happening to college cost or what have you that gets people's attention. And we would hope it already would, because we've got dinged pretty well. We always do. But I think a message that says it's not about lower taxes. It's about right taxes, because this is, if you want this, you got to pay for it. In some ways it's,
well, in theory, but they're not. Yeah. We've talked before about the need for a plan. My view is for any system to work, you have to have three things: properly designed incentives that encourage people to do the right thing and discourage them from doing the wrong thing; adequate transparency to provide reasonable assurance that people will do the right thing, and enough transparency to be ascertained when they do the wrong thing; and appropriate accountability when people don't do the right thing. And the truth is, we're 0 for 3
right
in too many areas. Okay, we're 0 for 3 for education policy. We're 0 for 3 for healthcare policy. We're 0 for 3 for our political system. We're 0 for 3, and we spent $5 to $6 trillion on COVID, quote unquote, COVID-related spending. Much of it had nothing to do with COVID. A lot of it was bailouts for troubled states, right. Okay, among other things. All right. And the amount of transparency and accountability over that is appalling. Yep. There are hundreds of billions, if not $1 trillion plus, in waste.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And with that, we're at the hour. So I do want to thank our special guest, Paul Hamilton, candidate for U.S. Senate, the Honorable David M. Walker, former Comptroller General of the United States, and Dan Worthington, former Associate Dean of South Dakota University School of Law. We'll see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. Till then, take care.